This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
We're gonna let him have it.
Obsessed with Peaky Blinders.
We're going back by order of the Peaky Blinders.
Hi, this is Lawrence Mozaffari, editor of Digital Spy, and for one final time, I can tell you that I'm still and will forever remain obsessed with Peaky Blinders. If somehow you've missed the other 10 episodes of this podcast, firstly, where you been, you absolute clown? This is the last one. If you want to go back and catch up, I absolutely recommend that you do. For the finale, it's all gone a bit Hunger Games, as our last episode is a two-parter. The first had me breaking down the Series 5 finale with TV critics Scott Bryan and Anna Lewis. But for this final one, it's all about director Anthony Byrne and Sam Claflin, who of course plays the ominous Oswald Mosley. Feels a bit daft to say this, but we are talking about the finale of Series 5 here, so obviously there are massive spoilers. Would be weird if there wasn't, really, if I'm honest. Oh, and expect swearing, not least because I'm devastated about the idea of having to wait for Series 6. So for the final time, let's get obsessed with Peaky Blinders. Pop your caps on, pour yourself something strong, and let's begin our final family meeting. Welcome back to Obsessed with Peaky Blinders. I can't believe it. We're finally at the end of the series, episode 6. And today, I'm very, very lucky to be joined by Mr. Sam Claflin, who's Oswald Mosley, and director of Series 6, Mr. Anthony Byrne. How are you guys? You all right?
Great. Thank you very much.
I have so many questions to ask you about the series. I absolutely loved it. Such a cinematic series. And Sam, incredible performance for you. Honestly, was blown away. Could I just start off for each of you? What was your biggest highlight from making this series?
Oh, man. Well, I mean, it was an honour and a privilege and a gift, really, to be invited to come and tell those stories and direct a whole season. So within that, there were so many highlights. I don't know if I could pick one or two. There are some favourite scenes of mine, and probably my favourite scene, or one of them, is when Sam walks into Tommy's office in the House of Parliament with Arthur and Michael present, and he kind of ties them up in knots and walks out, and that's a classic scene. Nobody's done that, I think, in the history of Peaky, has sort of walked in with no weapons other than his wit and his cunning and his ideology, and tied them up and walked out the door.
And Tommy's very rattled at the end of that scene.
Very,
scene,
yeah.
Isn't he?
It's a real moment. Yeah, that's a highlight.
Sam, what was your biggest highlight of this series?
Biggest highlight? Well, for me, like, in all honesty, I'd only ever seen one episode of Peaky Blinders before kind of getting the call asking to sort of be a part of it. And then, well, after reading, I sort of read the scripts of season 5 before I'd sort of really fully understood, you know. Oh, no, that's a lie, actually. I ended up getting sent the scripts, but insisted that I'd watched. I sort of decided I needed to watch series 1 to 4 before I kind of really delved into really understanding the story and the characters and my character's journey. And I think one of my highlights of this series and being a part of this was sitting and watching all 4 series back to back in about 4 days. You know, that just made me more, you know, it just confirmed what I already knew to be true, which was that I had to be a part of this. And then obviously stepping onto set for the first time, kind of dressed in the finery with the moustache and the hair slicked back.
And it's a strong tash. So
It's
you're still rocking at the moment.
It's not no choice. I'm really attached to Oswald Mosley. But no, it was, the whole thing was an incredible journey, and having the opportunity to kind of work alongside some of, you know, the world's greatest kind of actors, but also the greatest characters kind of being brought to TV, and working with Stephen Knight's writing and working with Anthony finally. There wasn't really a low light, really. I think every day was a highlight, and I think having the opportunity to kind of portray such a very, you know, such a fruitful character is a kind of a dream come true for any actor. The whole series, as Anthony said, was the highlight.
One scene I particularly wanted to ask about is from the finale, where we see Oswald sort of come out to this massive rally, which is intense. And I just really wanted to know, what was it like to film that scene of the day? Was there a lot of people on set? Was there a lot of extras and stuff? How was it putting that together?
Yeah, I mean, as people will know, I had two massive monologues that I had to learn. And I think the first one, I'd put all my, because that scene came first for me, and I put all of my focus and attention on that. And I think that was the one I really wanted to kind of deliver. That was the real moment, I thought, that defined Mosley in this series. You know, when you see the real him. The rally in episode 6, that was definitely a more difficult day, because I think there's more moving parts, and you know, there was the kind of aftermath of the speech, and you know, a massive kind of ensemble of a chorus of sort of supporting artists who were, I mean, across the board. Like, I mean, this is undoubtedly the best sort of supporting group of actors I've ever worked with. You know, the extras, you know, they were giving it everything. They were shouting and screaming and kind of helping me kind of find my feet. And I think that was also in itself quite daunting. But, you know, standing on a stage in that beautiful theatre, you know, I felt the pressure. But I think, you know, it's hard not to, when you're kind of speaking those sort of words and standing in that sort of place surrounded by those sort of people. It's
not every day you give a fascist rally, is it?
No, you know, and a fascist rally and you know, giving the salute, all of those sort of things was kind of bizarrely uncomfortable.
Surreal.
Yeah, very surreal.
Wild.
How was it filming it, Anthony? Because there's a lot of
there was a
moving
lot
parts
of
there.
planning that went into mounting that sequence, and it was treated very much as a sequence, and a huge team of people just facilitating the location and just the logistics of getting, I think we only had 3 days or something like that to do it. From my point of view, it's all about establishing the geography of it and where everybody is. And so it's a lot of fun to watch, but to make it, it's actually quite time consuming and labor intensive. And it's not as much fun for the actors as it looks when it's all put together, because everybody's in tiny little pieces and you're just shooting everything that you know you're going to put together in the edit, where there are other scenes where you get to really, you know, go for it and you can keep it alive. I mean, Sam had to do that speech from various different vantage points where the camera isn't really on him, and then you're coming in for a performance and spending a lot of time doing that. You're moving the crowd around, because we didn't have like 1,000 people. I think we had a couple of hundred people. So moving them around and keeping that alive and making sure that when, as much as possible, we were using real people in camera. And then we did some crowd replication. But it's only recently, I know you've all seen it, but I've only just mixed that episode. So
Oh, really? So
yeah,
it's still quite fresh for you.
So it's, yeah, I got goosebumps the other day, and I've seen this thing like 150 times, but it has real power.
I read that your version of Oswald Mosley, or the show's version of Oswald Mosley, is quite like a heightened iteration of this man compared to the sort of real life. I wanted to ask what sort of elements were creative license taken with, and what are sort of the more real world parts of it that we see in the show?
Well, I mean, for anyone who has seen the show in previous series, there have been some sort of historical figures, Winston Churchill being one, Jesse Eden being another. And I think what we have done, what you have to do in this sort of situation is find a reason for Tommy Shelby, you know, gangster in Birmingham, kind of finding his feet and you know, being introduced to someone of that caliber. And I think, you know, you have to take some artistic license in getting those two in a room in the first place. But you know, you know, all the information is kind of out there and accessible regarding Mosley and his thoughts and feelings towards the world. And so, you know, of course, a lot of the words, I remember Stephen telling me, a lot of the words said in this film, though not sort of said necessarily in that order, in that sequence, are real quotes of his. We haven't really, you know, exaggerated any of the words that he said. And unfortunately, you don't have to look very far nowadays to hear those words said again by, you know, political leaders across the world. It's an incredibly relevant and difficult sort of subject to swallow. but really, like, you know, the one thing I remember, my first day of filming, I'd sort of been studying his speech and his manner and the way that he held himself to such a degree that I remember Anthony going, "Sam, we don't want an impersonation." Like, I just need the flavour of him. Not in a bad way, but I was like, because I was so focused on getting the accent perfect. He's like, "You don't need to do that. Like, you know, just be yourself in his shoes, if you know what I mean." And I think so in that respect, this is me, you know, with a flavour of Oswald Mosley. It wasn't an impersonation, but really, yeah. I mean, of course, all the things that happen outside of the political sphere, you know, I think we'd taken some liberties, of course, but nothing that felt too far-fetched, and nothing that felt out of character. And you know, the rumour mill is a funny old thing. And there are lots of things that have been suggested in previous articles from years and years ago. But yeah, there's not too much information. There's not too much sort of things to go off other than what was in front of me. And I didn't know who he was prior to kind of reading the script. So for me, this was my insight into the scripts were my insight into who he was as a person, and I had to trust Stephen had done his research, and then trust what else I'd found on top of that. But yeah,
it feels like it must be tricky to kind of weave in a real person in between all these sort of fictional characters. I imagine it's quite a balancing act.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a concern. I think, the historical figures that have appeared, like Churchill and Jesse Eden, they don't veer too far from, they're not actually used that much throughout the show, and they don't deviate from their kind of MO. But using a kind of real historical person and then making them an antagonist is a very different thing, and so there are various considerations that have to be taken on board in order to make that happen. And you go back and forth in terms of having conversations about whether we should just call him something else and make him just another bad guy in the House of Parliament or something like that. But we made it work, and I think it was worthwhile because he's such a multifaceted and interesting character, and a great character to reflect and mirror exactly what's happening in our world today, which is very different from when we started shooting it. There were definitely parallels, but they've just become even more extreme 16 months later.
On the topic of that, that's kind of what I wanted to ask. There is really stark comparisons between what's happening now and what were the stuff you're covering in the show. Like, even one thing that really stuck with me was just even the term like false news being brought up,
which he said.
Yeah, fascinating. I guess
Britain first.
Britain first. I mean, yeah, it's
and copied. Yeah. I guess, what would you guys like viewers to take away from this? Because I know Stephen Knight's always been quite keen to highlight the sort of precursors and chain reactions leading to war. There is such a stark comparison between the two. What message do you think you'd like viewers to take away from this?
I think it's pretty clear in Steve's writing and in the way we've collectively presented it. We're not preaching to anybody. We're not making overt political statements. I think it's very open and very clear for people to take from it, from the show and from Tommy's actions, and his mindset and his sort of riposte to that ideology that he and everyone finds very toxic.
Another big plot line that runs throughout this series and kind of culminates in episode 6 is Michael's plan to kind of like take over the family, make his play for the business and stuff. I was intrigued to know, was this in the scripts sort of in previous series, and has this kind of been fed into Finn Cole's like performance leading up to now? Has he always known this is kind of where it was going, or was it kind of very new drops in, like, you're going to try and take over in this episode?
He was never sure, because it wasn't 100% clear in the scripts, and so he played it in a way that he would play scenes whether he would decide, I am doing this, and then other scenes he would play it that he was innocent of everything that he was being accused of, and that actually really worked. You could sort of see those sort of movements in different scenes over the series. And I think when we go into season 6, that will sort of pay off.
But you know what's happening.
I do know what's happening.
Exciting.
I've read 3.
Oh, three of series
3
6.
of 6, yeah.
How are those shaping up?
Amazing, really great. That's before I get in trouble.
I've got lots more questions.
Me too.
To kind of continue the thread with Michael, Gina mentions this idea of the second option when Tommy turns down his plan. Could you talk me through a little bit more about what that means? What is the second option?
Well, Gina is, she's obviously American, and she comes from quite an influential American family who were not overtly a crime family, but they certainly, there's a lot of grey there, and so that's kind of teed up to be sort of delved into in the next season. So, I mean, Steve has everything's thought out. You know, she didn't just say that line and it was like, oh, we'll figure it out later. It's all part of a kind of wide plan that we knew of before we were shooting it.
I was intrigued as well with Gina because we kind of get little elements for her in this series, but I feel like there's a lot more to be discovered. Does this kind of plan for takeover come solely from Michael, or is it like a combination plan? Because she doesn't strike me as like a Lady Macbeth making Michael do everything. It feels very much like they're a partnership sort of concocting this takeover.
Yeah, I think so. I think I always thought Gina has great street smarts, but they haven't been honed yet. And she's kind of, I don't know, maybe in for hiding somewhere down the way, but she is certainly a manipulator, and she's a game player, and she wants more than what she has, and I think she does come to Birmingham on a whim with Michael, but sees a lot of opportunity, and then it's kind of pivoting that opportunity back to America.
Because Stephen Knight's talks a little bit about sort of turning focus to the West in the future. Is that a big part of the future, would you say, America?
It's a part of it, certainly. I don't know if it's a big part of it, but it's certainly a part of it. I mean, we have to get over that cliffhanger. So, I mean, who knows where Tommy will be.
On the topic of Tommy in future series, are we to think that Michael's an enemy now? Because kind of we get the idea that Polly has sided. She's resigned. She's sided with her son. Is it kind of Polly and Michael versus Tommy? Is Michael a fully fledged enemy now?
Yeah, it's certainly set up that way. Yeah, and that's very much at the forefront of what you're kind of heading into. You know, at the end of that big family scene, which is quite an eruptive kind of moment. It's a really great scene, and Cillian and Finn play it so well.
I'm really intrigued about the relationship between Gina and Oswald as well, because during the ballet, there's this like little exchange, the little glasses blink and you'll miss it. Do you have more of a sense of like what their relationship is? I'm pulling at threads here. I'm digging for info.
Me and Anya talked about it quite recently. Actually, we were like, we never really explored that, other than there was just a look. And I remember it being scripted from the very beginning. There was a look, and obviously there's a lot of moving parts in series 5. But I remember when I had a very, very early meeting with Stephen, and I think at that point only episodes 1 to 3 of season 5 were written. So it was important for me to kind of know where my character was going, to know, you know, whether I wanted to be involved, you know, at all. I knew that I wanted to be involved, but I wanted to hear what was going to happen. And he was sort of talking me through how he writes certain series, because I was like, oh, this bit in this episode 1's great, and he's like, yeah, that might change because I don't know that that's leading anywhere now. So that he says, I leave all these open ends, and then he then spends the next sort of 3 episodes sort of trying to tie the ends together again. So I didn't know whether that was going to make it, if you know what I mean. The look, but I'm glad.
I love that moment.
I do. It's so.
That whole sequence is just it's all visual, you know. It's people looking at each other and
sussing each other out.
Yeah, and I think I prefer that, you know, as a viewer, because it allows you to project exactly what you're trying to suggest, you know, whether you're right or whether you're wrong, you know, and we don't know where that's going to go.
I feel like you do.
I might do, but it's more fun to kind of watch those moments where people are kind of looking at each other. I mean, Mosley's kind of going, who's going to be the lucky one for the night, and it's It's the swan. The swan gets it.
She was so lucky.
The swan does indeed get it. I guess I wanted to ask you a bit more about the direction of that scene. So when you directed, Sam, and what you were sort of told from the scripts, like what is that like? It looked to me a bit like a knowing look and a longing look and a potentially lustful look. Like what were you going for with the direction in that?
We didn't talk about it too much in a good way. I think we kind of left it open-ended to see if there was a spark, maybe. I don't know. But it literally, I think, as scripted, pretty much said,
Look at each
Oswald
other.
turns around and looks at Gina. Like, I think, it wasn't too much overthinking it. I think that's the beauty of those sort of moments in the script, is when you are left to your own devices to kind of feel whether there's something there or not. I still remember the one moment, like in episode 3, when I sort of go into the Shelby's office.
Yeah, I love
And, it was scripted that I take a cigarette, and we kind of did the throwing a lighter. But there was the moment of stubbing the cigarette out on the floor that was just, I did one of the rehearsals.
Yeah.
And you were like, we're keeping this, we're keeping it.
Yeah.
And I was like, cool, but like you sort of find those moments sometimes, but just because it felt right in the moment, as opposed to, it was my way of kind of going, fuck, like, F you without
Swearing's allowed. I've
Okay,
done the
great.
warning.
I've been
Oh,
trying
brilliant.
really hard.
no, but it was a moment, a fuck you moment, and
It's so perfect.
not that Tommy Shelby cares about his carpet, but it is just that I don't.
The locations department cared about the carpet. I think we had to get a little.
we can only do
piece.
that take one.
When we committed
patch.
to that, we had to go and find something that we could put on the floor so you could do it. But there's another scene as well, which is a great scene in Tommy's office, where you come in and catch him after he's just had a drink. It's the invitation to the wedding. And
Again,
you're
that's what
walking
happened
around
there.
the office and you're just tapping the ash like a total asshole. And there's one of my favorite edits is where you stop and you're looking at him and we're on you and you exhale this big lung full of smoke, and we cut to Tommy and you just see this cloud of smoke come right over his face, and it's silent. They're the moments that have real power for me, those visual moments where you're just like the looks that, people really pick up on those things.
It's exciting, I think, because truthfully, like, I'm completely in the dark as to whether I would even be involved in Series 6. But it's exciting to know that, the audience know nothing but want certain things and want for certain things, and sometimes those things work out the way you want them to, and sometimes they don't, but they take you by surprise. And I think that's what makes a show like this so amazing, and the writing especially just so incredible. And the characters you care for and care about. I don't know that did Stephen always. I think he always said that he imagined it to be 7. Not 7 series, but like he wanted it to go from the end of the First World War to the beginning of the Second.
Yeah.
And
he's been very clear about what the last moment is as well, the last scene.
The first air raid siren in Birmingham.
Yeah.
So exciting.
One moment that fans had kind of really hoped for in Peaky Blinders is a return from Tom Hardy, and we get it in this episode, kind of out of the blue, out of nowhere. I'm just nipping to Margate. Shit, Tom Hardy's back. What? I was intrigued to know. I know there was discussions in Series 4 about whether he'd live or whether he'd die. Was this kind of always in the plan, and how was it keeping this a secret and putting this all together?
It was a lot of fun, actually, because it's such a treat, and so we worked very hard to kind of make it happen. First of all, with Tom's availability, and then keep it a secret. And it was trying to get him in and out of Manchester without anybody seeing him or sort of being aware that might be what he's there for. And we did it. It was the last day of the shoot. He drove up himself the night before. I think he was learning his lines in the car. I think he had them on a tape, or not a tape, whatever USB thing. And it was just a really great day. It was a lovely way to end, actually, doing that. It was a great two-hander, with 2 great actors and really great writing. And it was just, it's a beautiful scene. I always looked at that scene. It's almost like it's a Beckett play that's sort of cut into the middle of an episode of Peaky Blinders. It's so kind of surreal, that that scene.
What was his name in the script? Because it wasn't his real. Was it
Oh,
David?
it was David.
David.
Oh, yeah, the code name.
Yeah.
But there was a moment when I was reading, even when I was reading like episode 6, I was like, who's David?
Yeah.
'Cause they're talking like they know each other.
Yeah.
I can't work it out. And then it twigged.
Yeah.
It did twig.
It was Alfie Solomon's. I chose David. It's a House of Solomon. That was the thing. That was the link for
nice
Uber
touch.
fans. But
I'm really intrigued to know about the sort of relationship between Tommy and Alfie now, because he'd kind of betrayed him. He did shoot him in the face and try and kill
Yeah.
him. So is it kind of what's
deserved
established
it,
now?
yeah.
Are they
And more.
are they at peace now? Is it sort of like
yeah, I
Tommy's
think there's
forgiven him?
a mutual respect there. I think he's probably one of the few people that Tommy does have respect for and sort of forgives his his character.
There's a moment in Ep 5, right, when I'm talking to Tom and he's like, I know someone who can run London, because I still haven't found someone to.
He does, yeah.
But I'm assuming
Yeah.
that it's Alfie.
Yeah.
And I remember one thing that sort of Stephen did mention to me was that the thought of this Jew hater and a Jew combining would be quite an interesting matchup. But I whether that ever happens, I don't know. But I
Anthony?
think
It feels like it should. Feels like it should.
I agree. Sam, do you agree?
Yeah.
I agree, Tom.
But that scene is like, I always treated it like it's that's the River Leith, and it's in the mosaic on the tile on the floor that he crosses over, and it becomes, you're in some kind of Greek mythology, and you're in limbo or purgatory or something like that, and it's sort of an existential think piece. It's an odd scene to stop for in the middle of a season finale and have these two people sitting. It's not an action sequence or anything like that, and it's not even adversarial as well. He's coming to do a deal, but they end up talking about life and death and a dream about a black horse.
So as well, Alfie predicts the end of the episode.
Yeah.
In that conversation, he says, "I saw you in a field with a big black horse, and you said goodbye." Then bang. Fascinating. Was that always sort of planned and scripted, or was that like a nice sort of touch at the end?
Yeah. I mean, there's a conversation about sort of wrapping it up, definitively, the season. I mean, not that scene, but because every other season is kind of, in a reductive way, he kills the bad guy or he defeats the bad guy and everybody lives happily ever after, and then you come back 3 years later and you start again. And there was a lot of conversations about whether we should just finish it in one way and then be fresh, but I was really keen to keep that cliffhanger because you don't really see cliffhangers and they're kind of fun, and I knew that we would do it in a very impactful way. I think it'll just be an exciting thing for fans to kind of postulate on and wonder what is going to happen, and is he going to come back, and if so, when will he come back?
What were those other ideas you kind of had at play before?
I didn't go too far into them because I was always it was plan A, there's no plan B, so I was only sticking with the cliffhanger. I stayed way out of those conversations. I didn't want to be drawn into, let's discuss it. But there was, I think Steve also wanted it to be that way and was very clear about it. But I think there was that kind of, is it going to be something that's going to irritate or annoy people who've invested, in the 6 hours and then and feel that they've been sort of cheated. I don't know how you would feel that. But,
Was the thought of them having to wait for another?
Yeah, I mean,
going,
yeah,
yeah. I suppose that's.
But it's such an amazing ending, and again, that was, one of those things we had to choose the right field in the middle of nowhere, so there was nobody around watching us.
I thought it was a really brave move, and I think it lands definitely because it's very different to the other sort of climaxes of other Peaky. I mean, sort of series 1 has a bit of a cliffhanger, but a lot of them is either sort of happy ending or like Tommy's an MP or something like that. So I think it was brave and great, and I think it absolutely landed.
But it's not done as, it's not a trick. The whole season is about the darkness of Tommy Shelby's soul, his psyche. It's what he loses of himself each time he goes around and around through these seasons. And this season especially was about exactly that. So you were taking him from episode 1 and really kind of dissecting his character and his psyche and taking him to the edge of oblivion. And, you know, Sam's character, Mosley, is a massive part of that destruction, because it's an antagonist finally that he cannot defeat, and he has that line which is really in reference to himself as much as it is about Mosley or anything around him, which is, I've finally found the man I can't defeat. And he is his own worst enemy. So at the very center of the season, that's really the kind of the core of it. So you're taking the audience right through that moment, and it is a moment of madness and a moment of insanity and a moment of kind of great darkness, and you have to work towards that moment. So it's certainly not done just as a let's throw this in and, you know, keep people on edge.
No, so it absolutely feels and it feels like a culmination of so much that's been building in this series. I kind of wanted to ask you to break down what elements are real from your perspective and what is happening in Tommy's head, because we kind of jump to him outside of his house with Arthur, which is also strung into that conversation they're kind of still having, and then he walks out into the field. So do you have, which bits, is he really at the house? Is he really talking to Arthur, and then it's kind of this sort of like
I hadn't thought of that.
Madness?
I always played it like for real, you know. For me, it's all kind of happening. Maybe the Alfie scene is something. I always said that it's not real. It's something that just has sort of existed somewhere else, that it is in limbo. But everything is just played for real, because you're dealing with somebody's mental health, and you're dealing with somebody who is not themselves, and that's being said to them over and over.
One of the issues with mental health is that a lot of people don't realize or are unconscious of the problem. I think, so, you know, for them everything is real. Every feeling, every thought, you know. So I think that's what I think this series handled really beautifully. That struggle of you know, Grace really is there, you know. She really is talking to him, and he's really talking to her. And I love those moments where she sort of vanishes, you know, and he's still talking. It's really, I think, it handled beautifully.
We did stuff where his lips aren't moving, but you can hear his voice, you know, every second line or something like that. We did a lot of stuff with sound, and that moment when he bursts into the dressing room after he leaves the stage.
There's a distortion in his voice, isn't there?
Yeah, I added that in the mix on one line. Mosley knew nothing, and he says he knew nothing, and I multi-tracked that line, so it sounds kind of insane. And then he sits down and he's saying who, and he's saying it over and over and over, and he really freaks Arthur out, and to kind of
it takes a lot to freak that man out.
When he's looking at Tommy, he's just broken, you know. Nobody's seen him like that before.
Speaking of who, you know, there's a lot of sort of contenders. It could be MJ Scanlon, it could be Oswald, it could be Alfie. Is there enough in the episode, do you think, for people to draw a clear conclusion of who's betrayed Tommy? I
think so. If you've paid close attention, yeah, I think so. You certainly find out. We actually cut stuff around that end section to make it more oblique.
What sort of stuff did you cut? You know, I'm going to ask you.
Well, I can't say because it impacts the next.
Okay.
Season.
Was that in the sort of speech, like rally area? Was it things preceding?
It's after the gunshot. It's to do with who. It's to do with that very thing. But it was important. It was in the script and we shot it. But then when I was editing it, it became very clear to me that if Tommy doesn't know, we shouldn't know. And at that point, everything is unraveling, and we should be unraveling because we don't understand what is happening, and he doesn't. And then Anna Calvi created this beautiful piece of music, and it's just this chaotic electric guitar that's mixed in with the speech, so everything is crashing around him. And so you've got the crowd going crazy, Sam is kind of whipping them up, and then you've got this guitar sound that's kind of building and building, and then it just erupts, and it's chaotic, and it's supposed to kind of draw you in. Or hopefully it does draw you in because you've all seen it.
I've heard you say that this series is kind of a part 1 of 2, and obviously you're returning to direct the next series. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And great to see you back. So you've done some amazing work on this series. What can you tell me about Series 6? So you've got 3 of the scripts. You're shooting towards the end of this year. When would we like to see it, and how much of a time jump are you envisaging?
I start later this year, and then we shoot early next year. And I have no idea when it would be out, probably early 2021, maybe, something like that. I can't say anything other than that. I mean, I really can't. It's I have read 3 of the scripts, and they're great. I did say it's feels like part 1 of 2, and that was purely based on the fact that you have this cliffhanger, and it felt like I personally wanted to continue telling that story. It wasn't a thing that I was happy to kind of walk away from. I also wanted to know, as a fan, you know, I mean, I came to this as a fan of the show, so it's a huge kind of gift for me. Forget about just as a director, but just wanting to stay in that world and wanting to know. I want to know what happens in the field, you know. I had no idea, so I mean, I do now, but at the time when we were shooting it, nobody knew, you know, so you have to commit to playing it.
Did you know when you shot this?
No.
No, you still didn't?
No. Cillian didn't either. We didn't know. I did. The very first time I finished cutting Ep 6, and I was with my editor, and we watched the sort of close to the end cut that we were happy with, and we had done our own viewing. And after it was over, I checked my email, and the Ep 1 of season 6 had just arrived, and literally as we'd finished, and I went, oh fuck, do you want to know what happens after what we've just watched? And then I sat on the couch and I started reading it, and my editor was just sitting beside me. He was just going, whoa, you know, fuck. And then I went, do you know what page I'm on? He was like, no. And I was like, 46. And I'd just been reading the entire, it was like story time for Paul sitting beside me on the couch. And so I actually read the whole thing out loud. I only stopped because I needed to get a glass of water, but I hadn't realized. I just kept going. It was so compelling.
Who would you say are the pivotal characters for the next series, if you can't say exactly what happens?
The Shelbys.
Yeah, the Shelbys. Yeah, the
It's going to be in
Shelbys.
Birmingham. There's going to be Shelbys.
Well, obviously, Gina and whoever her family are will make themselves known. Oswald Mosley. And,
good news, Sam. Congratulations.
I'll be in a paper somewhere.
yeah, and some people around in his world. And that's about as far as I could say. Go.
Brilliant. I feel like I have so many more questions to ask you. Maybe I'll keep asking you after this ends. But thank you so much for joining me, both of you. Look forward to seeing you back in Series 6. And Sam, good news.
Thanks, Lawrence.
And your work as well, Anthony.
Yeah, thank you
so
very much.
Thanks,
I enjoyed that.
Thank you.
That was good.
Caps off to director Anthony Byrne and Sam Claflin. There you have it. They'll both be back for Series 6. To tie you over, you can delve back into other episodes of Obsessed with Peaky Blinders on BBC Sounds, where we've interviewed creator Stephen Knight, the directors of each series, and picked apart each episode with my fellow TV obsessives. In the meantime, if you want to chat about Peaky, tweet at BBC Sounds with hashtag Peaky Blinders. While you're there, why don't you just go ahead and tell them how much you want Obsessed with Peaky Blinders to come back for Series 6, eh? Call it a favour to your old mate Lawrence. Of course, I'm always happy to chat about the show too. Tweet me at Lawrence_Mozza or find me on Instagram with at Lawrence Mozzafari. I personally want to say a huge thank you to all of you for listening. This podcast has been such an honour to be part of. I've been contacted by fans from across the world, from Brazil to Kentucky to Iran, and I've been absolutely blown away by the reaction from all of you. My nan even listened to this whole podcast without actually watching any Peaky Blinders at all. Bless that woman. And finally, I want to say a huge thanks to BBC Sounds and the team at Chalk and Blade for being such a dream to work with. And that's it for Obsessed with Peaky Blinders. If you're craving more obsessive TV chat, check out our other Obsessed With series. There's Line of Duty with Lolly Adefope and Brett Goldstein, and Killing Eve with Naomi, Shimada and Zing Zing. Obsessed with Peaky Blinders is produced by Lily Ames and Laura Hyde, mixed by Adam Lieber. The executive producers are Ruth Barnes and Laura Sheeter, and it's a Chalk and Blade production.
I'm James Barr. I'm a gay.
I'm Dan Hudson. I'm a non-gay.
Now, on Tell It, we look at the controversial practice of so-called gay conversion therapy.
I struggled for about 20 years and had really big problems. I thought, well, I have to try to get some help.
Are you still attracted to men now?
Not emotionally. Sometimes I can see a man and I think, well, he's very attractive.
Dan Hudson and James Barr have some uncomfortable encounters.
When people are mean to you as a gay person, and part of you thinks that it's your fault.
People are horrible. It can be really tough to grow up as a gay kid.
Tell It.
From gay to non-gay.
Available now. Download and subscribe on BBC Sounds.